For a most interesting topic today, unusual sources for genealogical research. I had the word scandalous in there at some point in the early stages of preparing this manuscript. They wouldn't let me put scandalous for some reason. But anyway, so here we are, unusual sources for genealogical research. Let's see if I can get slides to switch. There we are. There's me. There's who you're speaking with this evening. I'm going to have this slide up again at the end of the program, so don't worry about jotting everything down right now. I just figured it's always nice to put a face with the voice. Before we get started, we've got a really big crowd today, which I love. I hope you guys are enjoying these and getting lots of great research ideas, both for yourself and for your patrons if you're working for a library or an organization that helps people out with family and community history research. And I just, because we do have so many folks, if you haven't had the opportunity to either visit us at the State Library and Archives of Florida here in Tallahassee or to take advantage of some of our online materials, I just want to run quickly through that just to get you up to speed. We are located 2 blocks behind the Capitol here in Tallahassee at 500 South Bruno Street. We're open just like any other public library Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. with the exception of state holidays. There is often a misconception that archives are somehow different from libraries because all of our stuff is so old and rare that it's all locked up behind lock and key, and you got to get special permission and be working on your next book or something, or have your PhD or something to be working in archival records. And I'm here to tell you that is not the case at all. The state archives are open for public research. Yes, you, and anybody who you know who is interested in doing research into the history of a family or a community or a business or an organization or something in Florida, we are open to you to do that research. Just like a public library, we do have a reference desk staff that is very well trained in all of our collections and how to exploit them to get the information you need. So we do hope that you'll contact us by phone or email or come in and pay us a visit so that we can help you solve some of the mysteries in your own family tree or maybe someone who's come to your organization for help. And if you do pay us a visit, we don't need to make any appointments or anything, and we'll even give you free parking. We've got a parking garage just down the street from the R.A. Gray building where we're located, and we'll get you in there for free. So there we go. Housekeeping done, mischief managed there. Let's go ahead and dig into the meat and potatoes of our topic. Now, I have a dear friend of mine who once took a class at Valdosta State University, and I forget the name of the professor, but he said a quote that I just love, and I use it anytime I'm talking about this topic. And he said something along the lines of that family history, genealogy, is the business of locating every war hero and forgetting every gallows. And yeah, looking at a lot of family histories, you've seen the books that people will write of their, heraldry and family lineage and things. And it's true. We like to, we take pride in our family history, and we like to talk about our roots and the many interesting accomplishments that our ancestors have had. But if you've done much family history at all, that not every person who's in our family trees is always the bright, shining, knight in shining armor that we wish that every single one of our ancestors might have been. All of our ancestors are human, so of course they have the tendency to sometimes have something happen to them that's less than perfect. The specific cases that we'll talk about today, of course, are cases of divorce, cases of imprisonment, and cases of insanity. As sometimes these are topics that families may not want to discuss, or there may be a lot of rumor and a lot of stories and sort of unfounded lore surrounding these cases in family trees. But I think that it's very important that we remember that in order to put together the most accurate and complete family tree, sometimes it's very important for us to be aware that these things exist, to sort of treat them in a value-neutral way and just to accept that these things do happen sometimes in family histories, and that we need to be able to document them accurately, because just going by what great aunt so-and-so said at the last family reunion is probably not the best way to document a case of something that was less than above board in an ancestor's past. So what we're going to look at today is ways to empower you or the patrons that you work with in genealogy to document cases of these occurrences in such a way as to have the best accurate story possible, so that you can be very accurate in the way you describe it. So, once again, the three cases we'll look at: divorce, insanity, and imprisonment. I'll also comment as we go along on restrictions on acquiring these records. Now, there are a couple of limitations that I should mention as we go. I've said this in several cases with other webinars in this series. Number one, the records that we talk about today may be all Florida examples. We are going to use all Florida examples. These are all things that can either be acquired from the records of the State Library and Archives, or from courthouses in the state of Florida, or from databases that we provide access to here at the State Archives. But the kinds of documents that we look at are generally available from every state. So even if you're researching ancestors and families who are not from this state, that shouldn't be an issue. This will at least teach you the kinds of documents so that you'll know what to ask for when you go to other archives. You should also be aware as you go into this research, as you do with any other aspect of family history research, that not every collection of records that you encounter will be exhaustive. People get lost. People get their names expunged from records for various reasons. Sometimes courthouses burn down. All kinds of things can happen so that the records that we discuss today may not be as complete as you would need them to be for a given county or even for the state. So just be aware that those things can happen. But with a good team of archivists and librarians working with you, you can generally get most of the answers that you need to document the cases we'll talk about today. So let's dig right into it. Divorce. By the way, I don't know whether this couple actually got divorced. It's just they've got that classic 19th century very stern face because they had to sit still for so long. And they didn't really think about smiling in photographs. It was just a very serious occasion. You can see how seriously they're dressed. So I don't know if they had an unhappy marriage or not. They may have gone on and had a wonderful, delightful lunch after this. Who knows? But I chose that just because they look very serious. And this is, of course, a very serious issue. So, divorce. Divorces, as you can imagine, have long been considered a very serious occasion. In the 19th century, when Florida first became a United States territory, getting a divorce was even more serious. In those days, well, I guess that's still the same as today for many folks. A divorce is not only a change in a spiritual contract, but also a legal contract as well, because there's both a civil and a religious aspect of many marriages. So, just as that is the case today, it was certainly the case in those days. However, the legal aspect of a divorce is very handy for us genealogists, because anytime you go into the court system to seek to get something amended or changed or removed, it produces a paper trail. And let me tell you, that paper trail is very interesting for people who got divorced in the early years of Florida's territorial existence, from the 1820s up through the 1840s or so, because rather than going to a judge for your divorce, you had to actually go to the legislature. That's right. If you wanted to get divorced from your spouse, you had to actually petition the legislature, and they had to actually pass a legislative act decreeing your divorce. Now, that means that everybody in the whole state, via their representatives, had to get all up in your business in order for a divorce to take place. So let's look at how that actually takes place here. So I have up here on the screen the case of William Murray. He was a guy who lived in Nassau County, up around Fernandina Beach, Amelia Island. Beautiful area, by the way, if you get a chance to visit. Now, springtime, it's got to be just gorgeous up there. William Murray, he lived in the state of Georgia for most of his adult life, and then he moved down into Florida. And at that time, he decided that he did not want to be married to his wife, Sarah, any longer. And so he submitted a petition into the territorial legislature asking for a divorce. But get this, a petition was also submitted by his neighbors. You can see all the different names in here. All of these people were willing to sign a petition on William Murray's behalf, addressing it directly to the governor and legislature. And what it says here, because I know you don't want to read this 19th century chicken scratch here that we have. We, the undersigned subscribers, most humbly pray and beseech His Excellency the Governor and the Legislative Council that our petition may be granted. Being well acquainted with William F. Murray, who formerly resided in the state of Georgia and now resides in this territory, and knowing him to be an honest, industrious man, and being well acquainted with his wife Sarah Murray and her conduct, which is here proven before your honorable body, we most humbly beg that you would grant our petition, viz. To grant a divorce between the said William F. Murray and his wife Sarah Murray, and your petitioners will ever pray. All right? And so this was the way, and I love the old writing like this, and we have a large number of these petitions in the records of the Territorial Legislative Council. You can see down here at the citation at the bottom that it's in, here at the archives, Series S876. And I have excellent news regarding this series. We are currently digitizing all of Series S876 and its partner series, Series S877. I think that's right, yes. And what's great about this is that these are the records of the Territorial Legislature, everything. It's got all the petitions that were sent in from their from the different counties, asking for counties to be created or changed or divided, petitions asking for different laws to be created, asking for the county courts to be moved, all kinds of stuff like that. All of the committee reports from the different legislative committees. There's just, what's so great for genealogists is that these things tend to have all kinds of names in them, which can help you pinpoint specific people in specific places at specific times. But you would never think to use this most of the time in genealogical research. But going through these, we realized there's just so many wonderful names in here that we wanted to get them into Florida memory so that you'll be able to get a look at them. Now, this project probably will not be finished until sometime into the next fiscal year. I'd look for it around the end of this calendar year or early 2020. But in the meantime, anybody can do public research in Series S876 and S877. So if you're interested in this collection, or if you think there might be a divorce petition from the 1820s, 30s, 40s, 50s, just contact me or the reference desk, and we can help you locate that. So here's the final result. After all those petitions, the legislature would assign the petitions to a committee, just like they would any other bill, because remember, this has got to be a bill. It's got to be a law for you to get this divorce. The committee would consider the petitions and consider any evidence that was presented to them by the complainant or the defendant, in this case, the person who's being sued for divorce. And then they would report back to the committee of the whole with their recommendations, and then the entire legislature would vote on whether or not to grant the divorce. And if they did grant it, then it would become an actual legislative act, and it actually would have a chapter number and everything. So now in this case it doesn't, because this is so early they weren't even doing chapter numbers for laws. But in the later years they do that. So you can see how it works out. This is the cover page off of the Acts of the Legislative Council of the Territory of Florida, 1825, printed in 1826 though, and we can see here that they have passed an act for the relief of William F. Murray, whereas it's represented to this Legislative Council that Sarah Murray has violated her conjugal fidelity to her husband, William F. Murray, who is a resident of Nassau County in a most public and shameful manner. We don't get to see exactly what that was in the previous petition, but who knows? Series S876 might have another petition from William Murray that might provide more details. I'm here to tell you, I've read through some humdingers. So if you're looking for a good read, definitely Series S876. Look through the divorce petitions. Okay? Petition to be divorced from his aforesaid wife. Be it enacted by the Governor and Legislative Council that the marriage of William F. Murray aforesaid with his wife Sarah Murray be and the same is hereby dissolved, and he's released from all civil or moral obligation to contribute any money or anything to the support or maintenance of the said Sarah. And that's how it goes. Now, let me show you how you can get your hands on this. These acts of the Territorial Legislative Council have all been digitized, and they are keyword searchable. Okay, so let me show you how to get into that real quick. And what the acts are, that's the actual acts that have been passed by the Territorial Legislative Council. We also have a number of the acts and resolutions that have been passed by the state legislative council or the state legislature. Many of those are available online as well. So let me show you how to get those. All right, those are actually going to be, because they're a published resource, they're going to be in the state library catalog. And that can be found at library.florida.gov. Here we go. It's just that simple. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in Acts, Resolutions, Territorial. Okay, because I know that that's in the title of this book, and that's going to take me right to it. Well, I said it was. Let me say territory instead. There we go. Acts and Resolutions of the Legislative Council of the Territory of Florida. And you see how it gives me this electronic access bit right here? Now you can we have the nice print volumes, the originals. I mean, they're really something to behold because the printing presses in those days really just whammed into that paper. The imprint's incredible. You could use it to hold water in if you needed to. But we want to look at the electronic version. And you can see right here it gives you the volumes for all of the legislative council sessions from 1822 when the first legislature was held all the way up until 1845 when we became a state. Okay? And you can see it even gives you a link here to go to the statehood period. If I click on that one, there we go. Now you can see all the ones that they've digitized for the statehood era. Now you'll see that there's a little hole in here. 61 up through 1913. They're still missing some in there, but they are just as fast as they can adding those in. You can find a number of the ones that are in the hole on Google Books or Hathitrust. So there are other ways to get your hands on those legislative acts. All right, let's jump back in to the PowerPoint. Now, for a variety of reasons, mainly because the population of Florida got much larger and the proceedings involved in a divorce, it got to where people would want divorces for things other than straight out, blatant adultery and some of the more egregious things that might lead someone to want a divorce. And for that reason, the legislature decided that they had had enough of playing family court, and so they decided to turn that role over to the courts of chancery. In the various counties. And really, chancery courts, they're not a separate court. It's just a kind of court proceeding that the county judge could do. You'll oftentimes see at the top of a court proceeding for a chancery case, you'll oftentimes see the same judge that does the criminal docket and the civil docket. They'll just say, in this court for Leon County in chancery at the top. And it's just a specific kind of proceeding where you're trying to get someone to either do something or you're trying to get them to stop doing something. Anyway, once they turned over divorce proceedings to those chancery courts in the counties, there's kind of a procedure that you follow. First of all, you start with a petition. One party or the other in a marriage would still file a petition. It's just that instead of petitioning the legislature, you would now petition the county judge. All right, so you still send in a petition saying, I want to get a divorce from this person for these reasons, okay? The judge would, you would have the opportunity to present evidence in this cause, and the defendant, the person who you're wanting to get divorced from, would also have the opportunity to present evidence to controvert whatever it was that you had put in there. These could be depositions, it could be copies of letters, it could be copies of all kinds of things. It could be testimony from your neighbors or your siblings or your relatives or whoever. Once the judge had had a hearing and seen all of this evidence presented and had a chance sometimes to chat with the complainant and the defendant, then the judge would render a judgment. And so all of these things are typically contained in a case file that is kept at the county level. Now, we have a few of these here at the state archives. We have microfilm copies of lots of case files from the different counties. You can check with us you can either look at the archives online catalog, or if you have trouble navigating the catalog, you can also contact the reference desk to find out if we have the records you need on microfilm. You can also go to the courthouse where the divorce proceedings took place for the particular divorce you're interested in looking at. The advantage to coming to the archives is that if you're looking for a family and you're not exactly sure where they lived when they got divorced, you can look at several counties at once here at the archives because we've got all the counties' divorce records microfilmed through certain time periods. Again, courthouses burned down. Sometimes the LDS Church, when they were microfilming all these records, sometimes they didn't get certain pieces of it for one reason or another from a county. So just things to remember. These things aren't always exactly exhaustive. And then in addition to all of these different documents, sometimes you can also trace a divorce using the actual docket or the actual schedule of a county court. You'll find entries relating to a divorce proceeding in a docket. So there's that. Let's look at some examples. So for example, I'm going to go through the period here. This is an example of a typical petition. This was a divorce petition that was put in by a guy named Thomas Evans. He was from right here in Leon County. I chose this one because we happen to have the originals to the Leon County Chancery Court case files here at the State Archives. And it's beautiful. I wouldn't call the handwriting beautiful in this case, but the paper is certainly beautiful. The documents, it's great having the originals. You can oftentimes get the originals from county courthouses if they have preserved those case files. Sometimes they just have the microfilm. But anyway, this is a divorce petition, and here's what he said. So it's Thomas Evans versus Rosetta Evans, a bill for divorce in the Circuit Court of Leon County, 2nd Judicial Circuit. The petition of Thomas Evans humbly showeth unto your honor that he's a citizen of the state of Florida and has resided therein for the space of 2 years and more prior to the commencement of this suit, and that he and the defendant were married in or about the 1st day of January 1880, and continued to live together after such marriage until on or about the 3rd day of April of the same year. At that time, the defendant became very disagreeable and refused to live with him any longer. Your orator therefore avers and charges that the said defendant, Rosetta Evans, has willfully and obstinately contrived to desert and abandon him for the space of 1 year and more. They did that for a reason, because the law said that you couldn't legally sue for divorce until you had been abandoned for a certain amount of time. And then there's a list of other things, adultery being one of them. Believe it or not, impotence, natural impotence was grounds for divorce in the 19th century. There's a whole list of things. But that's why he puts that very specific length of time in there. So let's see. Your order further says that this desertion was not caused by any misconduct on his part, and that he has always treated the defendant as a devoted husband should treat a wife. Your order therefore prays that the bonds of matrimony existing between your orator and the defendant be forever dissolved, and that he be relieved of the mortification of its existence. Your order therefore prays that the state's most gracious writ of subpoena be issued to the defendant, Rosetta Evans, to make true answers to all and singular the premises, and to stand and abide by such order and decree as to your honor may seem meet. And your order will ever pray. They always put that at the end of petitions. And your order will ever pray. Anyway, so it was signed by his solicitor, Wallace Thompson. Yes, even in those days, you had to get lawyers involved most of the time. So there's the petition. Now, in addition to the petition in the case file, we also find some evidence that was put in by a deposition by a guy named Washington Evans, which, given his name, and you know, we can pretty much assume that this is probably Thomas Evans' brother, maybe a cousin, somebody who lives nearby. And I'll spare you reading the entire thing, only to say that essentially what he does is he just confirms everything that Thomas Evans said in the petition. Now, these case files can sometimes be very thin and have nothing more than the petition, maybe one deposition in favor of the complainant, and then the judgment from the judge. Sometimes it gets messy, and there's evidence on both sides, and there's back, and there's forth, and there's calling of witnesses, and there's subpoenas, and there's this, and there's that. So you may get very lucky. You may get a very well-documented divorce. Sometimes it's very, very straightforward. Sometimes the case file's gone entirely and hasn't been preserved by the court, and sometimes you just end up with a docket entry. Either way, at the very least, you usually are going to be able to get the date of a divorce if you dig deep enough into these county records. All right, so we've had a petition in the case of Thomas and Rosetta Evans. We've got some evidence that was presented on Thomas's behalf by his brother or cousin or relative, Mr. Washington Evans. Now we get the judgment. All right, the judgment from the judge here. And of course, I've managed not to print that one out. Let's see if I've got it here. Oh, yes, here we go. This cause coming on this day to be heard before the bill, the decree pro confesso, which means that Sarah, the defendant in this case, she didn't show up to court, it sounds like. And so for that reason, they've said that this decree is being issued pro confesso because the defendant did not actually answer the charge. So therefore, the court determined that she was guilty of whatever Thomas was saying. And that's why you always go to your court date, because otherwise they're likely to say, well, you didn't show up, you must have done it. All right, so here we go. The decree pro confesso and the testimony in the case, and after due consideration of the same, it is ordered, adjudged, and decreed that the bonds of matrimony heretofore and now existing between Thomas Evans, the complainant, and Rosetta Evans, the defendant, be and the same are hereby forever severed and annulled. And they and each of them are hereby relieved from the bonds of such matrimony and the responsibility of the same. Ordered, adjudged, and decreed this 20th day of January, 1886. And then the judge signs it. Judge looks like D.S. McCrae, or something along the D.S. McCrae, I believe. Oh, D.S. Walker, excuse me. So you can imagine if you've got a case in your family tree where you've got an ancestor, a great-great-grandfather or something like that, and he's married to this one woman, and then, 10 years later, all of a sudden, he's got a completely different woman who he's married to that says it's his wife, but the kids are all the same. Something must have happened there. Either great-great-grandmother may have passed away. She could have been declared insane, and maybe somebody else is living with great-great-grandfather or something. But divorce is one of the possibilities. So this is just one of the tools to put in your toolkit when you're trying to fill out those family trees, and you run into one of these strange cases where the structure of mom and dad and the kids kind of changes in midstream. Now, we've used all cases, examples where the man has been trying to divorce his wife, but it was just as legal for a wife to petition to divorce her husband. So those cases are found in here as well. All right, and the last thing before we leave this, you might remember that I said that we've been looking at a case file here for Thomas and Rosetta Evans, but sometimes you won't actually get a whole case file with these individual loose leaf sheets of paper. Sometimes instead, the county court, and this is especially true in the smaller rural courts where paper was a little harder to come by, people would write all these things down in bound volumes. And so sometimes you'll find Chancery court dockets instead, where they will write down all of these different orders and decrees and subpoenas. All that stuff gets copied into a book. And that's the record that you'll go to. This, for example, this is a copy of the Chancery court docket for Taylor County that we have a microfilm copy of here at the State Archives. There is also, to my knowledge, this still exists, an original copy of this book down at the Taylor County Courthouse in Perry. So there we go. All right, let's move on to another interesting case that can sometimes happen: insanity. So what do you do if you have a relative who shows up? He's married to his wife and they've got a few kids, and he's there in the 1870 census. He's there in the 1880 census. He's there in the 1900 census. All of a sudden, he's not there in the 1910 census. So you're thinking, well, he must have died. But then you look at his gravestone, and he didn't die until the 1930s. Well, what happened to him during the intervening years? Okay, same thing for a woman or for a child who disappears or, something like that. Sometimes if somebody disappears for a number of years, but then they suddenly magically reappear, particularly right after they've died, they show up in a Find a Grave record, or you have a gravestone, or they show up in the Social Security Death Index or something like that. Sometimes the reason why somebody goes missing for all those years is because they were institutionalized, either in prison or in an insane asylum or in a state hospital of some sort for tuberculosis, or like the Confederate home for old Confederate soldiers and sailors or something like that, nursing home or what have you. So insanity is one of the things that can sometimes happen in those cases. So let's look at how insanity works. So in the really old days, Cases of insanity would be documented in Chancery Court records and in probate records. And the reason for that is that, number one, the only person who can actually declare you insane, you might say, well, a doctor has to do that. That's not really true. A judge has to do that. The doctor can advise the judge, but the judge is, because it involves sort of the restriction of civil rights. So in order for you to be declared insane, that's a change in legal status, because it means something, not only for the person and their freedom, but it also means that their property has to be dealt with. Any taxes that they owe has to be dealt with. There's a lot of other, if they have children, something's got to be done about their children. So it's a change in legal status more than anything else. And for us genealogists, that's a good thing, because anytime you do something in a court system, that gets recorded. And so we're going to be able to trace cases of insanity through court records. So in the old days, if you got declared insane in the 19th century, up until the 1880s and 90s, typically the way this worked is you would petition a county judge and say, hey, I think this person's insane. I would like to get a declaration of insanity, and I'd like to be appointed their guardian, or I think that somebody needs to be appointed their guardian, or something like that. And this is all talking about before it was even such a thing to send somebody to a mental hospital. Okay, and so that's going to show up. Number one, it's going to show up in your Chancery Court records, because that's where you get that's where somebody is going to get declared insane. A judge will actually sign a decree to that effect. But then it also shows up in probate court records, because anytime somebody's property is being assigned to somebody else to administer, a probate judge is going to sign off on that guardianship and that distribution of estates and that sort of thing. So you got two different kinds of court proceedings that can help you document cases of insanity in the earlier years, in the 19th century. So let's look at some examples of that. All right, here, for example, this is a guardianship appointment in the county court of Gadsden County. This is going to be in probate records, because it involves guardianship, which means someone being able to take care of not just somebody's well-being, but also their estate. Okay, and we've got a case here where it looks like Mally W. Daniels, or Molly, and you'll see that they've declared her a lunatic in this case. You'll see the terms lunacy and insanity used interchangeably in these records. And that's also the case with the Florida State Hospital at Chattahoochee. They change it to, sometimes it's the lunatic asylum, sometimes it's the asylum for the insane, and they change names from time to time. So anyway, this is a petition on behalf of Molly Daniels, to the Honorable Paul Thompson, County Judge of Gadsden County. This is the petition of J.M. Daniels Sr. Possibly this is Molly's Maddie. Actually, it looks like Maddie. They just didn't cross their T's up there. Okay, it looks like that this is either a daughter or maybe a wife, and it's saying that Maddie W. Daniels, a lunatic residing in the county of Gadsden, this lunatic has an interest in some property located here in Gadsden County, and so it's necessary that a guardian be appointed. And then it goes on to request that that guardian be appointed. And then, of course, Judge Thompson would have said, all right, I'm going to appoint so-and-so as guardian. Maybe it would be J.M. Daniels Sr., or maybe it would be necessary that someone else be appointed guardian, but the judge would take care of that. All right, here's another case. This is, again, coming from the Chancery Court docket in Taylor County, and this is, let's see, upon considering the petition filed in this matter alleging the lunacy of a, let's see, that looks like Sebron or Lebron F. Bennett, and their destitution, and it appearing to the court from the evidence adduced that the allegations of the petition are true. So in other words, what's happened here is, previous to this page in the county docket, somebody had written in a petition to the judge. This is Judge Bryson, it looks like, W. Bryson, saying, hey, we think this guy, C.F. Bennett, is insane. And they would have presented their evidence to that case. In those days, it didn't take much. Usually, they might have brought the person in if he was behaving erratically, or they might have just gotten 2 or 3 or 4 people to swear before the judge that he was, banging his head against a wall, or maybe he was, he had illusions about people coming to get him or something like that. In the case of women, we often see cases that really just resemble menopause or maybe postpartum depression. Sometimes are used as evidence of insanity in cases like this. And in the 19th century, they knowledge of mental health at that time wasn't that good. And so a lot of people got declared insane, who nowadays we probably would have sought other treatment for that. But anyway, so that petition came into Judge Bryson, and he's saying, all right, I believe all this stuff is correct. It is therefore ordered, adjudged, and decreed that C. Burnett Bennett is a lunatic, and that amount, the amount of $12 per month, shall be paid from the treasury of the state of Florida, and upon the warrant of the comptroller to the said Bennett for the care, custody, and maintenance of the aforesaid lunatic. In the days before the state hospital, the state would actually had a small fund for paying out to individuals who were taking care of lunatics. Once they had a guardian assigned, a guardian could apply to get that money from the state. And that's before they had a facility to care for these individuals. So this is the kind of record that you'll see in the earlier days in those Chancery Court dockets. But now let's talk about what happens a little bit later in the 1890s into the 20th century once we have mental health institutions. Once we have mental health institutions, generally people would have someone committed to that asylum so that they could get the proper medical care rather than keeping them at home and having someone assigned as their guardian. That still happens in some cases. And, just as it happens today, some folks with mental health challenges still live at home with family members, and then family members are appointed by the court to be their guardians. But once an asylum is established for the state of Florida, then a lot of times we see individuals being committed to that asylum instead of being kept at home, particularly in particularly violent cases of mental health disturbances. So let's look at the case of Irene Bunkley. All right, Irene Bunkley lived over in Duval County in Jacksonville with her father, who was let's see, I thought I had his name down. Oh, Samuel A. Bunkley, there he is. Okay, and we can see him over here, and we can see these folks over here in the top right here. We've got Samuel A. Bunkley, his wife Mary, and we've got Estelle, and that is written down as Lorraine, but it's meant to be Irene. I've matched up the birthdays. It's Irene. All right, so they've got their two daughters living with them here. And then we go to 1907, to the 1907 Jacksonville City Directory, and we can see that Estelle and Irene are living at 512 Van Buren Street, and they're boarding. And it looks like Samuel is living in that same boarding house, working as a painter. But then all of a sudden, starting in 1910, Irene Bunkley goes missing. We can still find Estelle Bunkley in the census, but we're having trouble finding Irene Bunkley. Well, after a little bit of digging, we found an Irene Bunkley that matched the correct age, but she wasn't living in Jacksonville anymore. She was living in Gadsden County in Chattahoochee, which at first you're thinking, well, maybe she was going to school over there, or maybe she married somebody and was and maybe she had moved over there to live with her husband. The only problem is she hadn't changed her name, and she appears to be living with a bunch of people who she's not related to. So we've determined that Irene Bunkley actually was committed to the Florida State Hospital, and that's why she was living over in Chattahoochee. And so for that reason, that gives us, once we know that she was at the Florida State Hospital, then I'm here to show you some records that you can get on folks who were committed to the Florida State Hospital. There are several different ways that you can document the cases of insanity for individuals who end up at the Florida State Hospital. So again, just like the old days, a judge has to declare you insane. You can't just, a doctor can't declare you insane. Your neighbor or your father or whoever can't just go before the judge and say, hey, this person is insane. There's a whole process that you have to go through. And so here are the ways that those things are documented. Now, the Florida State Hospital some years ago transferred to the state archives all of their commitment records and all of their medical records, all the way up through gosh, I think it's the 60s or 70s, I think, that we have for the Florida State Hospital at Chattahoochee. And so those records are available for public research as long as they'll be redacted if they have any social security numbers, or if they have, if there's any other information for living individuals where there's public records exemptions. There's some people, if they're judges or law enforcement officers, or there's a variety of different exemptions to Florida Sunshine Law. If there's anything like that in there, then those will be redacted from the records that are served to you. Also, we won't serve any records from these collections because of their personally identifying information if they are less than 50 years old. They have to be 50-year-old records or older for us to serve them. However, anything older than that, unless it meets one of those exemption criteria, they are open for research under Florida Sunshine Law. So let me show you what kinds of records you can get on someone who was committed to the Florida State Hospital. There's two main kinds of records, and I'm going to show you how to get to both of them. Commitment records and medical records. So here we go. All right. The first step in getting someone declared insane and off to the Florida State Hospital is to petition to the judge, to the county judge for whatever county you're in, to appoint an examining committee, which had to have a doctor on it, and it couldn't have more than one person on it who was blood related to the person. And they had to go and examine the person who was thought to be insane. So you can see what we have right here. We've got in the county court of the county court of Duval County, your petitioners respectfully represent that they are citizens of Duval County, and that Irene Bunkley is also a citizen of that county, and that she's personally well known to each of the petitioners, and no more than one of us is related by blood or marriage, and that our knowledge of her physical and mental condition is sufficient to warrant them in the belief that she is insane. And so they're petitioning the judge to appoint them as a committee to go and examine her. And you can see that Samuel, her father, was actually at the head of this committee. So it sounds like he was familiar with some of the things that she had been doing to lead people to believe that she might have been insane. A couple of these guys may have been doctors. Not sure if Nichols was here. We might see later in the records if he was. And we can see here that there's some other ladies here. It might have been family friends. It could have been neighbors. It could have been distant relatives. So the next step after the committee is appointed is the committee has to actually go and examine the person who is presumed to be insane and then report back to the judge. So here is the committee's reports. All right. To the judge of said court, your committee appointed to examine the alleged insanity of Irene Bunkley. Having performed the duty assigned to them, we've made such thorough examination as required by the law and find the said Irene Bunkley to be insane. Her insanity of acute nature, the cause being the apparent cause being self-abuse. This is somewhat vague. Many of the commitment records have a much more detailed description of what they think is causing the insanity, or what the nature of that insanity being. You can see here it gives a place for that, the particular hallucination being blank. They haven't put anything in there. She's 14 years old, and she requires mechanical restraint to prevent her from self-injury or violence to others, and that she does not possess sufficient available estate for her support. That didn't necessarily mean that you couldn't go to the Florida State Hospital. It just meant that the judge had to take that into consideration, and that it would be a different sort of admission to the state hospital because she would have been admitted as what they called an indigent patient. Okay, and you can see that it looks like the committee has changed a little bit here. We've got a couple of doctors on the committee at this point. We've got two doctors and then another person here. So they've reported back to the judge, but the judge still has not declared Irene insane yet. We need a third piece for that, and here it is. This is the actual judgment, and the judge says here, whereas on the 19th day of June, AD 1907, this court, upon petition presented thereto, did appoint these guys a committee to inquire into the sanity or insanity of Irene Bunkley, and whereas said committee has made its report and to the effect that they do find the said Irene Bunkley to be insane and that her insanity is acute, the apparent cause being self-abuse, she requires mechanical constraint, and so on and so forth. It is therefore adjudged by the court that the said Irene Bunkley is so insane. And so then this goes to the sheriff or to the sheriff, and it says, all right, you are commanded to deliver Irene Bunkley to the superintendent of the Florida Asylum for the Indigent Insane for care, maintenance, and treatment. And so this is what would go into the commitment papers. All right. Sometimes the Florida State Hospital, if they knew somebody was coming, they would also send this questionnaire out to the friends and relatives of the person who had been adjudged insane. And they would ask some questions to try to get some more clues as to what might be going on with this individual and causing them to behave the way that they did. And just listing off some of the questions, you can see why knowledge of mental health at this time was somewhat incomplete. Let's see, here's some of the questions that they have on that questionnaire. Some of the basic stuff: name, age, nativity, occupation, habits, married or single, any children. They would ask some pretty personal questions on here about females in particular, because they believed that there were a number of mental health conditions that women were particularly susceptible to. For example, on this questionnaire, they asked about particulars about a woman's menstruation. And then, has the patient ever suffered gonorrhea or syphilis? Ever suffered attacks of fever? Any symptoms of epilepsy? If it's a woman, has she symptoms of womb disease? Which, I mean, just from that right there, you can tell that they're being really vague about this. I mean, womb disease, there's who knows how many different conditions. So they're being pretty general here. Has the patient ever received an injury about the head? Has the patient any improper habits, opium, tobacco, intoxicants, masturbation, things like this, and give supposed cause of the patient's insanity. So they go pretty deep into detail, and sometimes people actually attach pretty serious family histories and things to this. So you can, if you're doing a genealogical investigation and you run across a relative who's in here, sometimes you can get more than you bargained for. Sometimes you get family histories that cover not just this person, but also everybody they're related to, everybody they grew up with, because they're trying to get to the bottom of what may have caused this person's insanity. Okay? In addition to this, we also have a separate series of records that are the patient's medical records. These are also available with the same rules applying. 50 years or older are open for public inspection as long as they're not subject to one of those exemptions to Florida Sunshine Law. If you contact the State Archives Reference Desk and give the name of the person that you're trying to get the records for, they'll be able to tell you whether there are any exemptions. They'll take a quick look at it to make sure that there's no orders that are affecting its availability under the Public Records Law. But for the most part, if it's 50 years old or older, there's not going to be restrictions for the most part. But always check with the reference desk. Okay? These medical records can have everything from the results of blood tests to narrative histories taken by the social workers or the doctors that worked with somebody, lists of if the person was treated for a medical condition, there might be medical charts associated with the hospitalization within the Florida State Hospital. If they went to the medical ward, there might be some information about that. If they were discharged, they usually did an evaluation of the patient before their discharge, and so that information will be in the medical records. And you'll notice that there's a series number here with these records. The Florida State Hospital medical records are Series S1063, and the commitment records are Series S1062. And I just want to show you really fast how to get to those, because while you can't look at them online, we don't have them digitized, we do have the index of them digitized in the State Archives online catalog, which is available from anywhere in the world at archivescatalog.info.florida.gov. It's going to bring you to this screen, which is the main search screen for the State Archives catalog, and I'm going to show you a shortcut. Now, I mean, you could type in Insanity or Florida State Hospital, and you would eventually get to what you need in the search results, but I'm going to show you a little shortcut for getting to exactly what you want. And I'm going to use the commitment records as my example. I mentioned to you that that was Series S1062. So if I type in quotation marks in the search box, S space 1062, and close my quote right there, And I'm searching at the series collection level. So I'm not searching for individual files. I'm searching for entire collections. Look at that. It's going to take me right to the collection that I want. And I can click on the number of the search result right there. And it's going to take me to a catalog record about series S1062. It'll tell you what all is in there. It'll tell you how the records are constructed. And then if I click on this little yellow folder icon right here, it's going to take me to a folder tree that's showing me all of the folders within all of the boxes in this collection. And you can see that thanks to the hard work of a lot of archivists and volunteers, we have actually gone through and indexed every single commitment record that's in this collection. And it's even got the commitment date in here. And sometimes it'll even have the discharge date. And so you can go in and actually search this. Now, if you want to browse this, let me show you a little trick, because otherwise it's not going to show you more than 30 records at a time. But if you go up here to the address bar and see where it says record max, these are actually instructions to the server, and you can trick the server into giving you more results. Take that 30 and turn it into 999. Okay? And you can do this with any search results in the State Archives online catalog. It's a great trick if you're working with a collection that has a lot of records in it, like a governor's correspondence or these records or something with a bunch of names. This is always a good way to go. And it's just going to let you look at 1,000 records at a time. And then you can use your browser's find function, which is Control F on most browsers, and you can search for the name you're looking for. Like I just looked for the surname Brown, and I got 36 results just on this one page here. We've got O.J. Ashbury Brown, we've got Moses Brown, James W. Brown, John Brown, all these guys. So that is a great way to go through and see these. And you can do this with the medical records as well. Same process. You'll just be using series S1063 instead of S1062. All right, we've got just a few minutes left. I've got just enough time to talk about our final case, our final unusual case, which is imprisonment. We all know that we've got that one relative who just can't seem to either stop getting into a fight in public or maybe has had some cases of public intoxication or larceny of a hog or something like that. There's all kinds of amazing, strange things that people are imprisoned for throughout Florida history. So here's how you look to find records of imprisonment and just convictions in general, or even just accusations, arrests. So ways to document this. Number one, criminal court records. We're going to look at how to find those. Those are pretty easy to get your hands on. County jail records can be helpful if they have survived. Not every county has retained its county jail records. Many of them have, and we'll show you kind of what those look like. And then the state prison registers. The state prison out at Rayford. We have those records here at the State Archives. Not just the record of who was incarcerated at the state prison, but also the records of executions and escapes. So lots of good records there with lots of good stories to tell. All right, so let's look at criminal court records. Anytime a county criminal court gets together to meet, circuit courts usually meet. They would only meet once every term. They'd have a spring term and a fall term. Now they meet more often, typically meet more often, and then there's a lot more special terms that are called for big cases. But anytime that they would meet, the clerk of the court would write down the proceedings of what happened in that court. And those proceedings can have all kinds of stuff. Sometimes it has the names of the jurors, like we have right here. These are from the Taylor County Circuit Court minutes. This is from the 1890s. We've got the names of all the jurors that were called for both the grand jury and the petty jury. And then you can see over here that we've also got the individual causes. So in those days, they called indictments true bills. And so, for example, we have here the grand jury has the criminal docket was sounded and the following cases were passed upon. All right, the state of Florida versus William Hall and Martha Altman. A true bill, murder in the first degree. No arrest, cause continued for the time being. All right, and you can here's where I got larceny for a hog from. This was the state of Florida versus H.C. Lee and John Osborne. A true bill, larceny of a hog. That's a really, really bad thing to do down in Taylor County. Don't steal anybody's cows or hogs. You'll end up in court. And so you can see that they put all the different cases in here and anything that happens to that case. Sometimes, you know, the trial is had right then and there and there's a conviction. Sometimes the case is continued. Oftentimes the case is continued. And then sometimes there will be witnesses seen, or you know, there's all kinds of things can happen in there. But those circuit court records are retained by the county courthouse where those court proceedings took place. We do have microfilm copies of many of those records here at the State Archives. You can suss that out in the State Archives online catalog, or you can contact the reference desk to find out which criminal court proceedings we have for the county you're interested in here at the archives. Okay, and then so that's criminal court records. That's the easiest way to get your hands on criminal court proceedings involving a relative. However, if the county jail records have been retained for the county where that family member might have been incarcerated, that is something that you might check in as well. As I mentioned, sometimes, you know, people go missing from different court proceedings for different reasons. So if you don't find somebody in one place, try looking in another. It doesn't mean that what you're looking for didn't happen or that they weren't there. Sometimes it's just that the records were borrowed and not returned, or maybe they weren't recorded correctly, or there's pages missing, or there's all kinds of things that can happen. So cross-reference between lots of different kinds of records. That's going to help you out. So county jail records, these are typically also retained by the counties. We're lucky enough to have the Leon County jail records right here at the State Archives in the original. So these are actually taken from the books that were written in by the jailers. And you can see the kinds of things that they put in these jail records. It's absolutely remarkable. You get the name of the prisoner, their age, height, hair color, eye color, complexion, county where they were born, any special marks or peculiarities, if they had a scar or a tattoo or something. It'll have the date that they're committed, who committed them to the jail, what offense they were in for, when they left, whether they escaped or were discharged, any remarks, all kinds of great stuff. Also, this is good for cases of lynching in here as well. As a matter of fact, this particular page that I have showing up here, the reason I scanned it is it does have a case of a lynching here in Leon County here in the 1890s. Now, the state prison registers are very similar. It's just, of course, it's one prison instead of a county prison from all over the place. These are records from the state prison at Rayford. This is Series S500. We are currently in the process of digitizing these records and making them available online up to the point that we're able. Again, these have that 50-year wall, so the records need to be 50 years old or older for us to release them. Unless you're a direct relative, the reference desk can tell you more about the procedures for that. And so this is just the record of, you know, you get the person's name, if they had any aliases, you get some basic demographic data, which county court committed them to the state prison, why they were committed, the sentence, the date of the sentence, the release, and anything else. Like, look, for example, we have an escape here. You also get their inmate number, which can be the key to helping you look through other records that can be helpful as well. Wow, we have been through a massive amount of crazy records from all those questions you've always wanted to ask about the darker corners of your family tree, but didn't know exactly how to ask them. I hope this has been helpful to you. Let's take some questions if there are questions.
So this is Melissa. If you'd like to ask a question out loud, you can raise your hand using the hand raise button and we'll get you unmuted, or you can just type your questions or comments into chat. And we will stay on until we get all your questions answered. It is just about 3 o'clock, so we know that some of you have things you need to go do, and we appreciate that. But if you've got questions, we want to get those answered. Jennifer says, I can't wait to try some searching. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And remember, we get questions about these records all the time. Don't be sheepish. If you're a librarian and there's someone you're working with who wants to get answers to these questions, this is not uncommon at all. We get questions about these collections every single day. It might seem like sort of a scandalous line of inquiry to you, but not at all to us. Records are our business, so we're glad to help.
And we're going to give you guys a few minutes to think about what you want to ask, or maybe you're typing now. But for those of you that don't have any more questions, thank you for being on with us today. And hopefully we can see you guys on soon. Also, we have recorded this session and we'll be putting it up on our YouTube channel. We have a genealogy playlist. Hi, somebody just asked about our YouTube channel. We will send that out to you in a follow-up email within the next day or two. So stay on the lookout for that, and we'll send you right to our YouTube channel. So you can enjoy all of our genealogy webinar series that we've done. Okay, so it looks like we don't have any more questions. So we're going to go ahead and log off. But again, thank you guys all for being on today, and we'll hopefully see you guys on again next time.